You're listening to UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. That's why. UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio.
Okay, welcome back to United We Strike. We're on the UK section. My name is Rick, and my guest at the moment is Judith Hitchin. And she's going to be talking to us about the Constitution. Karen, can you mute your mic, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you, Judith. Judith's going to do a couple of pieces for us here on the radio, and this is going to go. Hopefully, this is going to be a long-term thing. So this is going to be a piece that's going to develop over time. So, Judith, would you like to take us into what you've been writing and learning?
Yes, thank you very much, Rick. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our listeners, wherever you are in the world.
You've got a piece. You're running the Runnymede, the Runnymede project, which is two things, isn't it? It's the Runnymede Gazette, which is run by Frank Taylor, and the Runnymede Messenger, which is written by you, and you do the constitutional. You look after the constitutional side of things, and Frank tends to look at the financial side of things. So in time, hopefully, we'll have Frank on as well, and he can come on and have a talk with our listeners and see how we're going. But for the minute, would you like to take us off on the Constitution? Would you like to start us off on a story, and tell us? Because the British people, from my understanding, generally don't know that we have a constitution. And I know it's on many different documents, but we really do, folks. And we've got a pretty good constitution. And Judith is going to help us learn more about it.
Right, okay.
So go for it. Judith, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
That's okay. Go for it. So, where are you going to start? Where do you want to start us off?
I've got something running through my headphones, which is all that's been said before.
Okay. You might have the stream. Quite possibly you've got the stream on the computer, so you might need to shut the web browser down. That will probably fix that for you.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. Okay, that sounds much better. I've got rid of that. Okay, so words of welcome over. Let's dip straight into our project, and if you have any comments about the content or any other suggestions, please feel free to contact me at runnymede@btinternet.com, and I'll repeat that later. Now, the Constitution, most people think, is a dry and quite boring subject. It isn't. The Constitution has really been in existence for thousands of years, and in fact we can go right back to Aesop at 600 BC. Now, he's saying, and this is about public officials and those who represent their fellows, note the important phrase here, their fellows. In other words, their equals, not their inferiors. And he said, we hang the petty thieves and appoint the great ones to public office. A certain resonance there, isn't it? And then there's another quote that people probably know a little better, Cicero. That's 106 BC. A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gate is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gates freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears not a traitor. He speaks in accents familiar to his victims, and he wears their face and their arguments. He appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of the city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to fear. So there we are. That's our political class at the moment. I'd like to discuss the man in the street, i.e. not the political class. The man in the street represents 95% of the population. So what about the man in the street? He or she hardly escapes criticism for the problems we're facing today. For decades, told by politicians this group or that group was entitled to be considered a special case, the man in the street forgot about things like using his brain to determine right from wrong, considering his fellows as he would wish to be considered himself, gaining in life only through his own honest labour, not through lying, betraying and deceiving. Consider the following. This is a quote from a friend of mine. The only reason some people get lost in thought is because it's unfamiliar territory. How true. For years, first as a coordinator for No to ID, and then in the Constitution movement, I have tried talking to people. It is so noticeable when you talk to someone who has not considered anything for years. You can almost hear the brain whirling and the cogs failing to line up. We must demand sustainability, security with dignity, through total accountability for the benefit and welfare of all. So here we have it. Basic, honest dealings as a general behaviour model for a civilised society. Hardly rocket science, you might think, yet I can remember being born into a country I both admired and respected, where such behaviour was the norm. What on earth happened to this country? A country I now heartily despise and where I feel ashamed because of things like the Iraq War, the fact that Blair continues to walk the streets and is not prosecuted for taking the country into an illegal war, despite all the public protest, he just ignored them, where the killing of Johns and Menendez was not redressed by those in charge of the operation being brought to court, where Dr. Kelly was murdered, and where over 300 people have died in police custody. Yet no one has been taken to court to account for a single death. This is not the country I was born into. People like myself have complained till the cows come home. Nothing is redressed. So what do we do now? I suggest that we look at the Constitution to find redress. Unfortunately, my personal observation of our society is that the overwhelming section of the population prefer to get on with a good life, with their drugs, with their alcohol, or both. They have no interest in displaying personal integrity. This is why the Constitution movement will never attract the majority, not until at least we are seen to be achieving something. I started the huge task of logging the results from the last election. Remember that when the election took place, indeed when the previous election had taken place, the real situation regarding the war in Iraq was well known. Yet people still voted Labour. Yes, they did. Of the people who voted, the overwhelming majority, say more than 90%, voted for the Lib Lab Con. It was clear to most people that if you voted for the Lib Lab Con, the country, despite Call Me Dave and his so-called cast iron promise, the country would remain in the EU. Look at the blogs now, full of people ranting that they will never again vote for either of the three main parties. I'll believe it when I see it. Most people, despite knowing the criminal tendencies of so many in Parliament, at the very least minimal to unmeasurable levels of integrity amongst the MPs, still felt constrained to vote for the Lib Lab Con, just like Pavlov's dog. Have an election, vote blue, yellow or red. Then they're surprised when the MPs and their bosses, whoever they may be, take no notice when they make representation to have problems resolved. Our membership of the EU is a case in point. The duplicity involved in the debate last week concerning the EU bill was, according to many commentators on the blogs, a total farce. And Palmer would appear to agree. I have yet to find time to analyse the hundreds of pages I copied from the internet. More on that next time. For now, I'm grateful to Anne Palmer for all that she sent out, which I'll be reading to you later. How can we, the people in the street, not represented anywhere, turn the tide? The Constitution movement needs to contact those people who see the world in our terms. Holding meetings can prove expensive. Publicising meetings is prohibitive. I'm hoping that with the cooperation of listeners to this show, the constitutional movement will find those people who understand at least a little of why this country, and indeed the world, is in a mess, and will want to do their bit to put things right. The question is, How do we attract people who think as we do? How do we change people's perceptions to start realising that we have a solution that will work? The general public, in my opinion, have a lot of growing up to do. In general, people need to stop shrugging their shoulders and show rather more personal responsibility than is generally shown today. We can't force people to change. We can, however, interest them in a new and legal idea to bring about change. Of one thing I am certain. Either we engage and interest the man in the street, or the baddies, you know who I mean, the self-styled political class, will win hands down, and we will become the next generation of slaves. Not simply the have-nots, but the have-nots and never will-haves. Politicians. Now let's consider this from Chief Justice Hurl. He was the Chief Justice to Edward II, 1307 to 1327. I think most people listening to this programme will agree with him. In the beginning, every man in the world was free, and the law was so favourable to liberty that he who is once free and of free estate in the court of record shall be holden free for ever, unless he does something to make him villain. The politicians and judges, not to mention the EU cabal and New World Order, certainly never heard about that before now. Now let's consider this well-known quote, a speech of Oliver Cromwell on the dissolution of the Long Parliament given to the House of Commons, 20th of April, 1653. It is high time for me to put an end to your sitting in this place, which you have dishonoured by your contempt of all virtue, and defiled by your practice of every vice. Ye are a factious crew, and enemies to all good government. Ye are a pack of mercenary wretches, and would, like Esau, sell your country for a mess of pottage, and, like Judas, betray your God for a few pieces of money. Is there a single virtue now remaining amongst you? Is there one vice you do not possess? Ye have no more religion than my horse. Gold is your God. Which of you have not bartered your conscience for bribes? Is there a man amongst you that has the least care for the good of the Commonwealth? Ye sordid prostitutes, have you not defiled this sacred place and turned the Lord's temple into a den of thieves by your immoral principles and wicked practices? Ye are grown intolerably odious to the whole nation. You were deputed here by the people to get grievances redressed, are yourselves gone. So, take away that shining bauble there, lock up the doors, in God's name, go. Time to hear that again. I've seen this speech quoted on the blogs time and time again. Do politicians take notice? Of course not. It is the strongly held belief of people like myself who believe in the Constitution that things are going wrong in the country to such a degree that if you trace back through the source of these problems, the original source of the problem comes back to the Constitution failing to be observed. The Constitution is a huge topic. Even I cannot deal with issues in one programme. That's why I'm hoping to be invited back next month. What I plan to do is to look at the problems and suggest why the Constitution is the solution to these problems. Remember, the meaning of the word Constitution is higher law. When the higher law is ignored, clearly matters worsen as you go down the pecking order.
For some of our listeners, can you just explain why the Constitution is higher law and what that actually means?
Unfortunately, no. I've been told the actual definition, Constitution, just means higher law. And I was lucky to get that because most people don't even know that. The Constitution is a huge subject, and even for this programme, the researches I've done took me into areas I didn't even know existed. And the reason it's a huge subject is because we seem to have lost things with each generation. We've taken it for granted that if people tell us we've got a democracy and we are free, then we're in a democracy and we are free. Now things have got so bad, they can't keep up the pretense. The fact is, our higher law has been ignored, and we've got to go back, research it, reinstall it, and start calling people who disobey that higher law to our detriment traitors, because that's what they are. When you break the Constitution, you remove a person's freedom. Your freedom is not contained in the ether. It is not an airy-fairy principle. It is higher law. You let that higher law go, you let your freedom go. And that's what people have to learn. Fight for it or lose it. Our forefathers knew this. That's why they fought 2 world wars.
Well, that's the isn't that the job of the oath to keep our representatives in office to abide by the constitutional law of the country?
I'm sorry to have to tell you, Rick, it's not only our representatives that didn't keep their oath. When I came into the constitutional movement, I started to hear whispers that people were not happy with the Queen. Now, I have a list here which I will read out later, and I'm going to ask people if they can add to that. And it gives a list of all the representation that has been made to the Queen. They got no response worth the paper it was written on, if they received a response at all. People
me and Albert Burgess went down to deliver a sack full of letters on November the 5th of all days, asking the Queen to do something, and they wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let us give the letters to the Queen. It had to be sent direct. It had to be posted to them. So there's no way that we could even know that the letters have even got to the Queen.
Have you had a response yet?
I don't know. I do have. I have had some emails this morning, but I haven't had a chance from both Jack and Albert at the moment regarding I think what it looks like is another letter that's going out, but I really haven't had a chance to read it. So I'm going to say probably no.
Yeah, I'm afraid this is what my list shows. The fact is, many people have heard of 1 or 2 campaigns. What I'm learning is a lot of people ran campaigns. I want to bring that list up because I believe if things are not altered and altered to the satisfaction of the man in the street, in other words, altered to the satisfaction of 95% of the population in this country, we run a real risk of another civil war. People have had enough. Really had enough. You might not have written to your MP. Perhaps all your listeners haven't. I've written to my MP. The man's an embarrassment and he's a complete waste of breath. And other people would say the same. In fact, they have done in the blogs. They've been quite open about their useless MPs. So if nothing changes, we have one option and one option only. I would say the buck stops at the top. The buck stopped with the Queen and the royal assent.
The Queen has signed all the European treaties as well, hasn't she? I
was just coming on to that.
Yep.
It's no good Albert saying she was taught by a Fabian. That Queen has more books in her library than I've got in mine. She's got more time on her hands because she doesn't have to do all the house chores that I do. And if I know what the Constitution is, she's got no excuse for not knowing either.
Absolutely. Oh, I mean, that's her job.
Exactly.
She's there as a constitutional monarch, my understanding of it.
She is there to protect us. We gave our sovereignty to her. If she isn't going to protect that, but she's going to join the band of abusers, well, put it this way, I'm a monarchist. That doesn't mean I'm also in favour of the House of Windsor.
Well, I would be. I don't have a problem with there being a constitutional monarch to guard that. When that's stripped away, that's when you start finding movements where people are taking their sovereignty back.
Well, I'm afraid we're in a really difficult position. On the first hand, you're told by the Minister of Justice, then Jack Straw, oh, we have no Queen. Then they were asked, and this is all on Brits at Their Best website, by the way, then they were asked, well, what is the Queen doing? And they came up with some stupid waffling reply from the Bonasetti woman again. Honest to God, foreigners must think she is the Queen. So then you get the Queen's speech. Now, they can't have it both ways. Either the revolting Major was right, and the Queen is now a citizen of Europe, and we have no Queen, or we have a Queen, and she should be doing a job. Well, I find that she isn't. A lot of people agree, and people are very, very bitter. We know what politicians are. They're one step up from the sewer. Everybody I know respected the Queen. They believed the Queen was there for them, like we were there for the country in 2 world wars. People lost all their relatives in 2 world wars, either because they went abroad and fought or because they were bombed out here. But they fought. And this woman can't even refuse to sign her name. I'm reminded of Edward VIII when it came out that he was going to abdicate. One of the papers spoke to a commander in the Air Force, and this man said, "I am expected to lose my life for my country. This man will not give up another man's wife for his country." There seems to be a problem with the House of Windsor, and I think these 2 issues illustrate that very clearly.
So do you think there's a divide anywhere in the royal family? Do you think, because, you know, I've got members of my family that I think drive me nuts and they're going down the wrong path, and I've got one side of the family which follows the EU and thinks it's great, and I'm going the other direction. Is there anybody like that in the royal family, do you think? Is there anybody that could help us out?
Well, the person who could have answered that question for you, of course, was John Gourier. He died only a few months ago. He always claimed that Prince Charles was the most approachable. I have to say, from what I've seen, they don't seem to care. They'll tell you they need money, and I wonder if every time they say how much money they need for this and for that, they ever ask themselves, with the ever-increasing amounts being taken out, not only in direct taxation, but even more so in indirect taxation, where do they think our money comes from? I don't have a pot of gold in my flat. I've got a tiny little balcony, so there's no orchard of money at the bottom of my garden. If they can't afford to live and me to go to the country, where in God's name do they think we're going? These people don't think, you know. They're like the politicians. They just say, "We need," and you're finding it, mate. You get poorer and poorer, they seem not to notice. I'm sorry, I've lost all faith in them.
So what are we going to do? Is there any way we can deal with this?
Well, I think the man in the street has really got to understand the state that we're in today didn't happen overnight. It didn't even happen with Edward Heath. It's been going on for a long time. I was astonished when I came into this movement to be told about the Red House report. I'd never heard of the Red House report. I know about it now, though. Somebody put me right. I looked it up. And apparently, before the Second World War ended, the senior Nazis got together and said, "Right, we've had 2 goes at this, chaps. We can't defeat the English, blast them. Well, not if we go the hard way. We're going to take the soft approach." And that's what they did. They decided they would set up the European Union as a type of Third Reich. Now, I know a lot of people out there think the New World Order's a load of rubbish. It was dreamed up by conspiracy theorists, and I used to believe that too, because I'm afraid people who talk about the New World Order tend to constantly shoot themselves in the foot because they don't explain it properly. How many people listening to this programme know when the phrase, the New World Order, actually came about? I was astonished to find out it wasn't the last century. It wasn't even the 1800s. It was the 1700s, when a Bavarian prince raided the property of Weishaupt, who was someone to do with the Rothschilds, and it was all written down there. The New World Order is not a recent thing. It's been going on for years, and I'm afraid the people that have been corresponding with me have now convinced me this is a serious problem. We can't change people's perceptions overnight, but if we don't start, the man in the street is going to go along believing what the politicians tell him. He should pay taxes. When he falls on hard times, he's a parasite for claiming benefit. That's all wrong. We put into a system so that when we fall on hard times, we don't finish up in the gutter and die. To their shame, the Daily Express recently ran a headline saying it was shameful that England had to pay for people on benefits. Perhaps it would be less shameful then if England stopped paying for people on benefits and we just left them to die in the gutter. That did used to happen. In fact, people might not know this, but many people with no homes still die in the gutter today. At the same time, politicians demand more and more, and the biggest demands come from Europe. What do we get from Europe? Tyranny. Why are we paying for this? Because our government won't get us out. But we need to explain to the man in the street, A, we need to get out of Europe. B, that isn't going to solve all of our problems. It will solve a major problem because we'll have our own money in our pockets. for
I think it would make a lot of this a bit easier as well. That would certainly be the first step, wouldn't it?
Well, they have to understand we didn't get into Europe because the majority of people wanted to go. People were lied about. Now, if they've looked at a case for treason, you all know about this.
Yeah.
So the thing is,
well,
you'll still be left.
I don't know if a lot of our listeners are aware. A Case for Treason is a site that I've been working quite closely with Albert Birches on, which documents all the correspondence, the Foreign Commonwealth Office and various other organisations on taking us into Europe, and we were lied to. The government knew within 3 decades we would lose our sovereignty as a nation if we went into this. Yet the public was told this is just a trade-in agreement.
Well, I can actually add a bit to that. I went to an event organised by New Britain, and Teddy Taylor was there. Some of your listeners may remember him. When I told him about Lord Kilmarnock's letter, he said, well, that would be dreadful if it were true. Well, I mean, I sent a copy of the letter. I never heard anything back. I hope Albert remembered to give you a copy of Lord Kilmarnock's letter, because the famous saying was between Heath and, I can't remember the bloke, newspaper man, we'll have to make sure the Cabinet doesn't see this. Lord Kilmarnock told them, you will lose your sovereignty. If you get Hansard, and it is on that disc, shoehorned into Europe, you can see on Hansard, it clearly says, MP after MP got up and said, this will impinge on our sovereignty. Up gets the government. No, it won't. No, it won't. Lying toads.
I have the full document. In fact, I've got the full Hansard report on the site. Just in case anybody doesn't know, that site is www.acasefortreason.org.uk. And yeah, we've got all that.
Can I just say, if there's anything I mention here that people don't know about and can't find, always email me at runnymede@btinternet.com and I will reply.
You can also go on the site. We've also got a link to the chat room, and you can ask some questions there. If you've got any questions for Judith, I can read them straight off the chat room. And
oh, great! Yeah, sure. Right, well, if I continue with this, I think a major problem we've got here is that after 2 world wars, the man in the street never concerned himself with the country's enemies. After 2 world wars, people wanted peace. And most considered that if they dreamed of peace, ignoring all the problems, never mind about that, because they'd fought 2 world wars, they'd killed the beast, but they hadn't. In those days, communism was the threat, and people just dreamed of peace. They thought peace would automatically follow World War II. In particular, the man in the street suffered greatly from political correctness. Will it ever be possible to quantify the harm political correctness has done to this country? Only time will tell. Now, after 100 years of the Constitution being ignored, one thing we can say for certain is that the Constitution cannot fight for himself. We have to get this through to people. The Constitution can be the best in the world. If you don't fight for it, you might as well not have a Constitution. It can't defend itself. The man in the street cannot deal with the treachery of politicians without the Constitution. And the Constitution can't fight treachery if the politicians, the judges, and everyone else, including the man in the street, ignores it all. Now, let's consider the various current issues and look at why the public are being kept in the dark, or the public are making, I have to say, the same stupid decisions again and again, and in so doing are allowing the enemies of higher law to gain over them time and time again.
Well, a friend of mine has a saying. Says, I'm sure she's probably listening. Human beings are the only people to fall over the same rock twice.
Yeah, it is dreadful, because actually it is our quality of life. You get one go at life. I don't believe that you come back time and again. I've worked hard all my life. Do you know I have got nothing to show for it? I've watched these lying, treacherous so-and-sos, mentioning no names, but definitely thinking of Blair. I look at all the money they get, and I understand one thing. All the while, million after million after million is put into their bank account. Other people like me automatically go without. You go for a job and they turn around and say to you, I can't afford much. Do you know every job I've gone to has started off with that? And do you know what? I think with smaller companies it's actually true. They are so highly regulated. It costs so much money. They virtually talk themselves out of business if they don't pay their workers cheap rates. For one reason or
another. I work within the industry, and I've seen the regulations that are coming in from Europe, and it is phenomenal.
It's horrendous, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So the thing is, we have to understand whether we work or whether we don't work, we are fast becoming a nation of slaves. And believe you me, if hard work had anything to do with the equation, you would be talking to a millionaire now. I'm not a millionaire, and I don't stand any chance of being one. And what's more, you know, I've gone 50, and I realise now it doesn't matter how hard I work. The system really is geared against me unless the system changes so that people stop raking in millions and treating everything in the country as they're more entitled to it than their fellows. We are going to become that nation of slaves. I'd like to stave off that day. I really would. And I believe the Constitution is the right way to go. I'll put it this way. It's the legal way to go. When you go throwing red-coloured fire extinguishers at policemen, I understand the anger. Believe me, I do. I've lost all sympathy with the police. But it doesn't work overall because there's too much illegality in this country. People don't want more illegality. They want peace, they want fairness, they want justice, and they will not see people acting illegally as being on their side. Let's keep it legal, please, everyone. Now, if I had to start saying, where does the Constitution come from? It starts with the Mole-Mutine laws. They actually started in pagan Britain. And you'll see the start of that investigation in the Runnymede Messenger. The Runnymede Messenger you can see if you're not already subscribing, and it's a free subscription, incidentally. You'll see that on Brits at Their Best and vote for it. Look us up there, and if you want to get involved, it tells you how to do that. If you want to send me an article, you can do that too.
Just stick the website address on it. It's britsattheirbest.org, is it?
Don't know. If you put in Brits at Their Best, it comes
look
up
into that, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've got a little shortcut on my desk, so I don't have to remember. Bad, isn't it? The man who started it was completely unpronounceable. I'll spell it. Dyvalmoelmud. I presume that's where the name Mole-Mutine laws come from. And very, very interesting subject. I'm certainly going to be doing a lot on that because somebody wrote to Albert Burgess. I'd never heard of these laws till I saw this man's email, and he said that's where habeas corpus came from. How many people listening to this programme knew that? I mean, for God's sake, we've got to have one of the richest histories in the world. What is happening in our schools? We thought our generation was the last well-taught generation of history. I've never heard of half these things. And people who are at school now, they're just not learning it. Now, I've come on to the list of campaigns here.
They're covering, because I've got, my eldest girl is 11, they're covering things like the coronation oath when children are 10 or 11 and don't have the best, they can't grasp exactly what the coronation oath is, which is the Queen's contract with the people.
Right.
That's
now,
when she's learning it. So she's got in years to come, if you ask anybody in the curriculum, they'll say, "Oh yeah, you learn that when you're 10 years old." I mean, that's pretty important, don't you think? That should be more than a couple of days in a 10-year-old's class.
Let me tell you something. In your couple of days child's class, did they mention the oath changed for Edward VII? For George V, for George VI, and for our Queen? Did anybody bother to mention that?
The oath was only mentioned by the coronation oath. That was the only time, as from what I can gather.
Well, you can check this. You can check this with Albert Burgess, as I understand it, and this is something, again, there's so much to do, I can't do it all in one go. The coronation oath was really defined in the Act of Supremacy, certainly in the time of Elizabeth I anyway. Now, they have altered it. On whose say-so? You see, this is what is happening with so many laws in our country today. We're not even told that they've altered it. It's just done because we, the great unwashed, the great ignorance, the people they want to tax into the ground, are not worthy to be considered, or their opinion. That's wrong.
No, and if we did get any laws in, they'll just repeal them anyway.
Well, I think we, the great unwashed, have got to understand what is constituted by the Constitution. How many people understand that we handed over our personal sovereignty to the Queen? Frank Taylor will tell you, how did kings come about? Kings came about because in time of war, they wanted one leader. After that war ended, kings disappeared. They only got made up again when another war appeared, and then they all disappeared again. But then, you see, we got the power thing, didn't we? I often feel, if you look through history with a cold eye, the problem frequently actually isn't the monarch. The problem is the hangers-on. And that, I feel, is where the country is in a state today. We have a problem with the hangers-on. The problem is the what?
The hangers-on, okay.
Yeah. They're the ones who want the power. They're the ones who are never seen to be manipulating. Those are the people we need to look at. Yes. Now, if you're ready, I can quickly go through my list of campaigns. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 things. Okay, where 14. I know...
Is this 14 campaigns, this is 14 campaigns running, is this in the UK, or is this...
Yep. This is campaigns against Europe. I've got plea before the Court of Appeal against the Heath government for passing the European Communities Act. Most people will know that was Ross McWhirter. I've got misprision of treason cases before magistrates in Hexham, Northumberland and Lerwick, Scotland, Norris McWhirter and Rodney Atkinson. Now, there was a session of burning the EU flag in Windsor Castle, in Windsor Great Park. The person concerned thought that was UKIP, wasn't sure about the date. Petitions to the Queen to defend British rights and freedoms, that was in 2001, may have been run by CREC, not certain. Also 2001, the Lords asking HM Queen not to sign the Treaty of Nice. Petition to the Queen invoking Clause 61 of the Magna Carta to defend British rights and freedoms. 25 noble lords did that, don't know who they were, needless to say, nil response. 2003, High Court action, Southall versus Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs against the EU Constitutional Treaty. Jeff Southall and Michael Clark, represented by John MacDonald QC. 2006, a case for reporting treason, Albert Burgess. 2007, Ashley Mote and John Gurrier petition the Metropolitan Police Commissioner with a view to bringing a prosecution for various malfeasances in government against 5 people in government. So that was Ashley Mote and John Gurrier. Again, I don't know what's happened there. Doesn't appear to have been much because they don't respond. Letter written by Albert Burgess to the Queen and others. I don't know who exactly was involved there, but lots of people wrote to her. You have
that might be. Was that this 2010?
No, that comes later. This is 2008.
Okay.
You've also got the Better Off Out campaign. That's the Freedom Association. 2008, Peers delivered Magna Carta Barron's Committee petition to the Queen. Don't have any more details than that. Please, if anybody knows, Runnymede at btinternet.com. I need you. Campaign for a referendum. Start that again. Campaign for a referendum on the EU Constitution, run by CREC. Nil response again. Now, some of these people, they ran campaigns where they had every postcard numbered and they knew that thousands of postcards went. No response. I mean, it's like you're either invisible or they're deaf. Right, 2010, letter to the Queen, copy to HRH Prince of Wales, Magna Carta, Clause 61 provision. Then we've got 2010, Metric Martyrs, Let Justice Prevail. Now, we sent a letter off to that, to HM Prime Minister. Even when you write to the Prime Minister, you don't even get a letter saying, we've received it. I bet you there are people listening who must know about other campaigns because every time I put this out, somebody comes up with more information. If you do, please be in touch.
Excellent. So your catalogue, one of the things you're doing on the Runnymede Messenger is cataloguing all the different campaigns.
And the response, if any. Because people in this country, I mean, at the emails on the Constitutional Group's emails list, people get on there, they are so irascible, actually some of them can be quite rude. You people have got your heads in hands, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? I want to get this list up to date and say, here you are, this is what we've done. And what was the response? Silence was golden. You could fill a blank page with nothing on the response. We have done a lot, and we have been ignored.
So what are we going to do about this?
Well, the only thing we can do, in my opinion, is to educate the general public. Now, you've got people like Ann Palmer. She sent this out recently. And she's saying, for example, one of the things that's been up on the email list for months now, support the Bill Cash amendment. He's got it right. Good old Bill Cash. Sorry, pardon, I don't think so. That statement is worthless, says Ann Palmer, and Bill Cash knows it. Well, that would appear to be the opinion, too, of people on Conservative Home blog. Lisbon also gave the EU competence and legal personality over national legislation. However, if you wish to send a letter, do so, but please also send the fact that the Queen has taken careful note and is therefore aware of any action that we may take in the future when the time is right. Really, this is ridiculous. Honestly, this is what's come from the Queen. That letter is indeed Her Majesty's approval, even though she may never have seen it, and the writer of the response to us might never have even taken the trouble to read such a long letter. In brackets, long letters have their uses. That letter was written in deadly earnest because I do not believe there is any other way to save this country. I certainly can't think of anything else. We can get out of the EU now, but I know without a doubt that the day will come when we will be trapped forever in exactly the same way all those once separate states in the USA are trapped. And although all seems well there, basically they all speak the same language and are still states. The EU wants to be one state and all according to their laws. She's absolutely right. Even the Morning Star had a headline on the 13th of the 1st. MPs revolt at feeble EU bill. As they point out, the bill says significant, sorry, pardon, who will be the person to decide what is significant? And as another person on the blogs pointed out, all right, so they get it through now. In the future, they can repeal that bill, that act. But in reality, the one act they need to repeal, the 1972 Act, and all the Heath legislation and actually everything that came after, none of them want to repeal that because actually the politicians are quite happy to stay right where they are. Because when they get out of this Parliament, there'll be a nice little number waiting. Remember the Kinnocks? They've done rather well out of it, haven't they?
Very good. Well, that's quite a lot.
Would you like me to go through a few more of these things I've got here?
Yeah, sure. Go on. I'm just reading something in another room.
Okay.
Go on.
Well, I've had an email from a man called Bob Lomas, and he used to run something called the Magna Carta Society. And he has gone to the trouble of writing a simple email for those who aren't involved in the movement. 1. Sovereignty means complete self-autonomy, and this is 6 simple facts that explains the reasons behind the unacceptable state of this nation as it enters 2011. Sovereignty is indivisible and therefore cannot be shared. Absolutely right. That is the nature of the beast. There can be no sovereign head of state in a nation that is no longer sovereign. So what exactly is the Queen? When in 1972 the sovereign head of state, the national administration and legislature surrendered the sovereignty of the British people to the sovereignty of a foreign political power known as the European Community and now the European Union of Regions, by accepting the terms and conditions of the Treaty of Rome, the Queen ceased to be a constitutional sovereign monarch, there being no provision in the Treaty of Rome for such an office. Thus the system of British monarchy was ended, there being no other form of monarchy recognised in this country. It is inconceivable that the Queen, as sovereign head of state and official governor of the nation, her ministers, advisers and privy councillors, let's not forget the privy councillors who also broke their oath, like every bloody one of them, did not understand the terms, conditions and the principle of the Treaty of Rome, particularly as they have also accepted the terms and conditions of subsequent European Union treaties over a period of 43 years. By accepting the terms and conditions of the Treaty of Rome, the Queen and Parliament agreed to abandon the legitimate constraints of the British Constitution and so dismiss themselves from office. Thus Parliament became an unlawful assembly, and as such, the ratification of the signing up to the Treaty of Rome by the European Communities Act 1972 had no lawful standing or legitimacy in British law whatsoever. Can you make it simpler?
Well, it would be interesting to see if the average person who sits down and watches X Factor on a Friday night, and that's his highlight of the day, could get his head round.
I suspect 9 out of 10 people walking the streets have never heard of that.
Absolutely.
And to show you,
this is the problem. I think we should be running some courses, some constitutional courses, up and down the country. We should be teaching people and then sending these people out and teaching them. That's one way. You've got to get people's interest first of all, and I think that seems to be the struggle. I think that's the struggle. Certainly, in everything that I tend to do, is actually getting people's attention and getting them to feel that they need to stop and actually do something about this.
Well, I feel a lot of people, it's more than that. They want to do something, but they are now so defeated, they have really given up the battle before the battle started. I can see the clock moving on. I quickly want to go through two things here. Again, the Morning Star here, and incidentally, in case anybody thinks I'm a real left-winger here, being unemployed for so many years, I cannot afford newspapers every day, and I've reached an agreement with a man who is also a resident on the estate where I live. I pay him £20 a month. He gives me his newspapers, and so he buys the Guardian and the Morning Star, and that's how I get some of these really interesting things, because like this now from the Morning Star, I've never seen this anywhere. One of our finest columnists over the last 20 years, Tony Benn, is well known for the directness of his published diaries, covering his time as a minister in the Labour cabinet during the Harold Wilson era. In his writings covering 1963 to 67, he wrote something which could serve as a valuable text for these latter days. He said, "As a minister, I experienced the power of industrialists and bankers to get their way by use of the crudest form of economic pressure, even blackmail. Those lessons led me to the conclusion that the UK is only superficially governed by MPs and the voters who elect them. Parliamentary democracy is, in truth, little more than a means of securing a periodical change in the management team, which is then allowed to preside over a system that remains, in essence, intact. If the British people were ever to ask themselves what power they truly enjoyed under our political system, they would be amazed to discover how little it is." This stark statement has a remarkable resonance today. I couldn't agree more. It goes on. If anybody wants a copy of this, email me. I'll get it to you. The last one I want to make sure, because actually I've only gone through a third of the work I've got here. This is something that came out on the 4th of January in The Guardian. I'll say it twice, because believe me, I didn't believe it the first time I read it.
This is in paper copy, is it? This is in the actual paper.
Oh yeah, I've got it here. I'll cut it out.
Okay.
Now this is The Guardian, 4th of January. High street banks employ hundreds of millionaires. I thought, yeah, ha ha. Then it goes on. FSA revealed 2,800 bank staff got more than £1 million. Now, I listened. I'm going to repeat that in a minute, but first I want to tell you, I listened to a programme on Radio 4 this morning where Ed the Millipede was reminding everyone about the business of Cameron, Cast Iron Dave, you've got the referendum. In opposition, he said, considering all the public money that had been given to the banks, it would not be right for any bank to give its employees more than a £2,000 bonus. And bear in mind, you're saying here, these are failed people, they failed to do their job, and they still get bonuses?
They're failed organisations, I agree.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be getting any bonuses. They should be getting sacked.
Well, precisely.
We should be walking in there and taking the banks over.
Now, what they've said here is the banks gave 2,800, that is 2,800, 2,800 of their staff £1 million. So we've given them one lot of money in our taxes, and we are all taxed. I don't care whether you're working or not, because the level of supplementary tax on everything you buy is so heavy. So we all pay that bloody tax. They took our money in taxes, and then they got bonuses when they should have been paying us back the money they took. That was wrong. They should have been allowed to fail, and then they could have joined the ranks of the unemployed and then enjoyed the privilege of being looked down on for being unemployed. It's absolutely disgusting. The regulator, not as tough as many critics had hoped. Oh, huge surprise. It really is disgusting. So I don't know. I really don't. When you can fail and then be given £1 million bonus, something seriously wrong, and I'm afraid that seriously wrong comes back to the fact that the people who are expected to pay, in essence, have no representation. I can see my time's coming to an end. It's been great. Thank you ever so much, Rick. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and hope you'll invite me back again.
That's okay. Well, we still got we still got a few minutes. We still got a few minutes left. We've got 50.
Well, can I recommend?
We've still got 7 minutes left. We've got some things now. I was talking to you just before the program. Karen was keen to see if you would sort of help, possibly with the strike. And Karen, are you there? Possibly not. Nope. But you're going to do. You said you're going to do a piece. You're going to do a piece on the strike in the Runnymede Messenger.
Absolutely.
For the next edition, to help us try and drum up a bit of support. We're doing the. This is on the. What's the date again?
15th of April.
15th of April. That's right. On the 15th of April, we've got a 3-day strike planned. Karen, do you wanna?
Hi, yes, Judith. I have just got to tell you how my heart sings listening to the passion in your voice, and
Thank you.
You just know what you're talking about, and it's wonderful. I am so happy that you are on board with this and that you'll help us.
That's great. I've enjoyed being here.
Well, you certainly gave the Queen something to think about. I mean, she does have more time than you.
I just hope my MP's listening to this. I don't suppose he is. He wouldn't do anything worthwhile. But he has a lot of responsibility here, because in 2008, a man called David Noakes interviewed him for a local paper in Westminster called The Westminsterer. And he sidled up to our what's his name now, Mark Field, and said, Mark, you know, when Parliament loses its grip finally, you're going to be out of a job, mate. What are you going to do? I'll go back to industry, he said. When I sent him an email asking about this, he didn't reply, but one of his assistants did and said he'd never said it. But the point was, the paper published it all. You cannot trust these people. I'm sorry, but you can't. Can I just mention, whilst we're online, that I've got a book here called Share the Inheritance, and this gives you a very easy-to-read idea of what English history is about, and the Constitution comes into it. In particular, they mention about a man called Stephen. He is an unknown hero of the English Constitution. Magna Carta would not have come about without him. It was his knowledge of history that got him looking into the treaties that came out under the Henry I and II. And that was when he realised, in law, not a fairy tale, in law, the king had to obey the law. That's what got the Magna Carta started. Next time, I want to tell you all about that.
Well, we've got, as I say, we're debuting on our new station today, and we're one of the things we're keen to do is build a big international community, so we can share all this information, not just with from us here in the UK, but the same problems that are going on throughout the world.
Exactly right. That's true.
And I spoke to you earlier. We'll work out a way. If you want to take a slot, you can take half hour a week if you like. You're welcome to. I'm happy to come on and produce and we can get that out, and we can put that up on the site. We can go back as far as you like, and by the end of
yes.
we'll have records.
You see, you have to go back to the start, Rick, because that gives you your legitimacy.
Sure.
You've got people like Cherry Blair just getting up and writing this Ministry of Injustice book on the Constitution, changing it to suit themselves. Sorry, pardon, but there is no legitimacy. I am going back in the Constitution to the earliest form of law, and I am going to prove where our Constitution came from and why people like Cherry Blair should shut up and put up. They don't know the Constitution, or if they do, they damn well ignore it because it doesn't suit them. The Constitution was not put there for her and Tony. It was put there for every subject in the land. Remember, we're not citizens in this country. We are subjects of the monarch.
Well, it's my belief that anybody who practices law should have a very basic understanding of the Constitution, which is something that's not going on at the moment, and there's all sorts of examples of that throughout the country.
Oh, yeah.
But we're running short on time. We've got to go to a break.